Hello, dear friends. This is Kardec Radio at 11 p.m., nourishing all of our souls with the study of the book Evolution into Worlds. Welcome, welcome. We are here to study the book Evolution into Worlds, a book that was written by the spirit author André Luiz through the mediums Valdo Vieira and Chico Xavier. This book was written in 6 months in two different cities by two different mediums and put together. Unbelievable. Without revisions in the sense of editing, etc. Just as is. According to what we know, 6 months it was done. Turned to the publisher, the Brazilian Spiritist Federation, and published in 1958. And this is the book we're studying. So welcome, friends. This book, if you're coming in today for the first time, remember this book is to console our hearts. I know there's a lot about science in it, but that doesn't mean that it's for scientists alone. It's for everybody. André Luiz says that in this book we shall study our multimillenary pilgrimage. And he mentions that through the knowledge we're going to ignite the fire of our hope as we aim to the ascension towards God. This book has high contents of hope, of wisdom that we need to break down and share with many friends around the world. Okay, so welcome, friends, and don't forget, this book has 20 chapters in its first part and 20 chapters in the second part. The first part talks about the evolution of ours, including the evolution of our spiritual body. The second part, it mentions life's issues in general, fantastic issues. We want you to join us when we study that as well. Each day is a new chapter. Okay, yesterday we were studying chapter 5. Chapter 5 was about, okay, hold on, just a second, cells in the spiritual body. So pretty much we were talking about many important things, and amongst them, if we're being good, gentle with our physical body, taking care of our best pet, the cells of our physical body and the spiritual body, right? As André Luiz teaches us that the cells are like little animals, microscopic ones. Then our dear friend Raza yesterday asked in a comment, and I mentioned to him, I'm going to answer to your question before we start chapter 6, because this question is also very important. He asked, can thoughts and actions of others affect our cell's function? How? Okay. Can the thoughts and the actions of others affect ourselves? If it's invasive, of course it does in terms of physical body. But let me relate to you, friends, a law that André Luiz explains in another book, Mechanisms of Mediumship, the law of the mental field. He says we're going to attract what we emit. So if somebody is emitting anger, it is only going to affect us if we have it inside of us. It's magnetic. Okay? That's why Jesus is the guiding model, because he was here. He received mental darts, as André Luiz says, mental darts of all sorts. And that didn't affect him. Why? Because he only emitted love. Okay? So for us, there is this law, the law of the mental field. So what does it mean? If something that others are doing are affecting us, we need to ask ourselves, how can I raise my vibration? Thoughts, feelings, make my words and my actions become more noble. Correct? So that's the short answer to this question. Thank you, Raza, for asking this. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that is still a taboo in the world. It's about sex. But in Spiritism, sex is about the forces of creation. It's created by God. So let us go to the slides and we can learn from André Luiz about evolution and sex. Chapter 6, Evolution and Sex. So let us go. Here's André Luiz. He's going to break down this chapter in 7 subtitles from the emergence of sex. He's going to talk about bacteria, green algae, the magnetic fluid concentrations, filters of transformation, ancestry and selection, genealogy of the spirit. So let's begin from the beginning when he says to us the following. He says, many years passed by, right? Long stretches of time, he says. And in which bacteria and cells are experimented in asexual reproduction. Thus, a certain group presents in its own constitution positive and negative magnetic qualities that are voted by spiritual guides who are responsible for the advancement of the planet. The animal evolution is felt on the eve of its birth. Pause. He's talking about bacteria and how they reproduce. So, pretty much we know about this. The single cell that divides itself into cells. This is not sexual reproduction, okay? To do the sexual reproduction, you need 2 cells exchanging information, and then genetic information we're talking about, and then multiplying, reproducing. Okay, so let's go back. What he said to us. Take it easy. Remember, patience is everything, friends. When we read this book, that's why the book is highly, highly spiritual, because it teaches us to be patient and very resilient and endure the journey of this learning. So he's talking about the evolution. Do you remember when we studied together? Let me talk to you a little bit about this. Do you remember when we studied together the evolution, right? The celestial monad, which is the intelligent principle, doing internships in matter, and then through viruses, bacteria, and then later, in the plant kingdom, and then the animal kingdom, and then the human kingdom. Asexual reproduction, the first step. But observe this. In the text that I showed to you, André Luiz reveals something quite unique that science doesn't know yet. What is it? That's why it's called, the book is named Evolution in Two Worlds, because he reveals something right away. In the first paragraph, he says, well, spiritual guides, they will insert positive and negative magnetic qualities in those bacteria. When he says positive and negative, he's talking about polarity. Polarity. 2 poles. It doesn't mean that one is good or bad. Positive and negative in terms of polarities. So They complement each other. So who created it again? God. And then there is the polarity. And why am I mentioning this to you? Because nowadays there are many people trying to dismiss the fact that we are born physically in a particular sex. No, no. According to Spiritism, it's highly sacred why we come in this sex or that sex. Something to learn. We're not talking about sexual orientation. We're talking about the learning of the feminine and the masculine in through the biology. So we need this biology for something. There is a reason why. So we recommend to parents, stimulate your children to appreciate the body that they were given and not take it for granted. Oh, I was born in the wrong body. I don't think so. You need this body. Again, I'm going to repeat, this is not about sexual orientation. It's about the learning through that biology, that physical body. This book is the living proof that we come in a particular body of a particular species for a reason. And if we're not open to learn it, we're not going to progress until we learn it. And then we're going to repeat the experience until we learn it. Teresa Castro is asking, did Sheila and Baldo knew that they were both psychographing the same book? Oh yes, they knew. They knew it. They knew. Teresa, thank you for asking this. They knew they were team working, but they didn't communicate with each other in the sense of editing, making sure. It was like this. On Wednesday, one was psychographing in one city that was like 5-hour drive, okay, from one to the next. No internet, no phone at the time. Very hard communication. So one would psychograph on a Wednesday, Sunday the other would psychograph the other chapter, and so on and so forth, non-stop until they finished it. Unbelievable. Thank you for your question. Thank you. Very important question, friends. So, okay, again, so they are saying that the spiritual guides responsible for the advancement of the planet, they inserted the positive and the negative qualities in this bacteria. So you didn't create sex. I didn't create it either. God did. And the spiritual guides who are responsible for the planet, they helped us acquire these polarities, the feminine, the masculine. Throughout, he doesn't say the names here, he just says positive and negative, just out of technicality and saying there is a purpose. So the first, when we reincarnate, the first learning is to appreciate the polarity in which we were reborn. If people are trying to dismiss this, they are doing a disservice to reincarnation in itself, because that's the first learning. And what do? We take it for granted. So homework for all of us, huh? What are the lessons to be learned in this life? Since you were reborn with this body of a man or a woman, nothing, I'm not talking about sexual orientation. We're talking about the experience in the body of a man or a woman. What is that for? If we don't know yet how to answer, we need to work on this, because that's a major learning experience. Okay? Okay? Okay, Teresa, thank you. So the animal evolution is felt on the eve of the birth of this. Okay. Now he's going to explain how these bacteria they acquired these polarities. Okay. So are we on the same page? Hopefully so. Let's go back to the slides and continue. So he's going to talk about the fact. Okay. That. Okay. Sorry. Of all species of bacteria already formed, one stands out in the immense deposits of fresh water over the stony bed of the Proterozoic. This bacteria is differentiated from the many that exist on the Earth's crust. It does not have the absolute amoeboid characteristic. It shows ellipsoidal configuration, as it were a microscopic rod or a tadpole, to which it does not lack some trace of radicle in the format of a tail. Look at this. This is the bacteria that he's going to talk about, the leptotrichia. This is how it looks like. I mean, at least what we can do it nowadays. But this is at a time that he says the Proterozoic era on Earth. What is it? This is the geological era before the first abundant complex life on Earth. Okay? It's like the early times. It consists of 3 geologic eras: the Paleoproterozoic, the Mesoproterozoic, the Neoproterozoic. And just so we know what they mean, we're talking about the transition to an oxygenated atmosphere. We're talking about glaciations. And we're talking about the evolution of soft-bodied multicellular organisms. So we're talking about earlier life on Earth, bacteria, viruses, okay? And then he says to us, André Luiz explains, those bacteria back then, okay, they are already different. And then the good spirits, and he's gonna say, the spiritual instructors, they are going to work with them, like in a lab. So it is the leptotrichia that in the myriad of individuations, meaning reproductions, remains for thousands of centuries in ancient rocks, feeding itself simply of iron. When it breaks free of the tiny ferrous shell where it hides, it is forced to instinctively swim until another similar shell wraps up, and the good spirits, the spiritual instructors, they work on it to boost its transformation. Pause. This is unbelievable. I know we're trying to absorb the words, but you don't need to memorize anything. There will be no test. But what is important for us is to think about this. André Luiz, in every paragraph, is revealing things that material science has never said before. What is it? That we do not evolve alone. There are spiritual guides, spiritual instructors that are working with us. They are boosting our development in the name of God. They intervene in our potentialities. Just like a parent or an educator before a child. So Andre Luiz is revealing something that is unprecedented. Science thinks that matter just happens to evolve by itself. Spiritism comes and says, oh well, it's not only that. Yes, it evolves, but it's depending on the mental body of that intelligent principle, the spiritual principle. And that spiritual principle is going to mold through the mind, the spiritual body, and the spiritual body, the physical. Plus a group of superior spirits that are working with us, as if we are in an infant care, spiritually speaking. Yes, the baby is there developing, but needs caregivers. Mhm. Spiritually, it's no different. We have caregivers from day one. God doesn't create us and say, well, you're on your own. No, this book is a living proof that we're never, ever, 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 ever on our own. No, no. We're always surrounded by loving and kind spirits that are not only cheering for us, but working with us. Mhm. Isn't that beautiful? Yes, it is. Jailton, welcome. He's asking, why having two polarities in separated bodies when some species on Earth still have both in one body only? Well, I think as we continue studying this, we are going to understand. But I can cut short, so we don't need to wait for the next chapters. But Jailton, your question is very, very important. If we go shortcut, spirit book, law of society, it's a law. By creating polarities, God wants us to exchange, share, be together. The more we are together, together, the more we are together, the happier we'll be. Right? That's the goal. It's the law of society. If we are just by ourselves self-sufficient, we don't progress. But if I have polarity, and you do too, we exchange, we evolve. So, God bless the possibility of exchanging. So, this is the wisdom of God. I'm not trying to understand the greatness because we still don't know everything, but the little bit we can grasp by knowing that it's the law of God that we mingle. Let's mingle, right? Responsibly, but let's mingle. Okay? So, does that make sense, Jailton? Let me know, okay? Thank you for asking this question. Now, ready to go back? Remember, we're evolving, and the good spirits are boosting the next experiences as if a parent or an educator comes and says, now I'm gonna give you um, a different apparatus or a different clothes for you to swim, for you to run, etc. And that boosts potentiality in us. New faculties, new opportunities of development. Thank you, Jailton. All right, friends. Now, let's go back here and see what Andre Luiz. Is it clear? Before I move to the next step, is it clear? The most important thing here for us is not to know about the evolution because science says about it, but to know what's really on the behind the scenes, the origin of it all. The mind of the spirit plus this beautiful collectiveness. You and I are never alone, ever. And now we know that this has been happening for billions and billions of years. Thank you. So let's go back and see what Andre Luiz reveals to us. he says that this differentiated bacteria, the leptotrichia, as you can see here, ellipsoidal, he says, these are André Luiz' own words, losing the tiny metallic wraps. Remember, the bacteria were feeding themselves with iron on the stones and compelled to build similar shelters that meet the need of protection. These bacteria, which express important figure of junction in the evolutionary work of nature, are compelled to movement. In this movement, not only will they attract each other in preludes to sexual reproduction, but also they will know by accident mass death, through which they reappear in the same tracts of life in that they are, under the careful attention of the conductors of the earth, to be reborn after a long time of new trials in the form of green algae inaugurating the sexual communion in the world. Observe here, movement. He's talking about movement. Okay, pause for a second. Let us talk. Huh? He's saying to us that they have to move. Law of progress. Movement is progress. And the law of association. And he says, under the careful attention of the conductors of the earth. They are talking about bacteria, mamma mia. Think about this, friends. Feel it. Can you believe it? Andre Lewis is saying that the conductors of the earth care about the bacteria. No. Yes. This is super different, friends. Very different. It's a revelation to us. And people sometimes do not understand the greatness because we don't understand the greatness of divine providence. Many people think that God cares for the big leaders of the earth, humans. God cares about all of its children, including the spiritual principle that are animating the bodies of bacteria. After all, matter matters. Matter matters. Matter is a child of God. The spiritual, the material principle. Exactly. Sunshine is asking, is the primitive element the same as the universal fluid? Okay, so I'm not so sure. Primitive element. Let me go to the spirit book. Question 30. So we are on the same page and I understand what you're asking. Okay, Sunshine. Thank you for asking. Let's study together. So question 30. Let's see. Okay, properties of matter. Does matter consist of one or many elements? One single primitive element. The bodies you regard as simple are not true elements, but rather transformations of the one primitive matter. Okay, no, the primitive matter is not the universal fluid. Remember, one is the divine breath. André Luiz says in the first chapter, quoting from the very studies of Kardec, the elements, material principle and spiritual principle, connecting it, the universal cosmic fluid. What is this universal cosmic fluid? The divine plasma, where everything originates. And then, of course, if we go deeper and deeper, people are going to say, but if everything came from the same source, they are all the same. Hold that question in the mind, okay? Andre Luiz may touch that subject at some point in this book, but we're not gonna pause now for that philosophical discussion right now, okay? Scholars in Spiritism have been discussing about this for the longest time. So let's hold that question so we can, through the study, identify elements that may make us understand better. Thank you for asking, Sunshine. Now, again, we're talking about the spiritual conductors of the planet caring for the bacteria. Can you believe it? Hmm? Hmm? Yeah, primitive element, Sunshine, is about the spiritual, the material principle, as Kardec says in previous questions. He's talking about the material principle. In the previous part of it, when it says elements of the universe, which is before that question, it says here, matter is the tie that enchains spirit. It is the instrument that spirit uses and upon which it simultaneously exerts its action. What is a spirit? The intelligent principle of the universe. Okay? So, there is a difference here. Matter, matter as one of the elements of the universe. Okay? So now, the spiritual conductors creating that, it's like the polarities, is like features. Okay? Features in the spiritual and the physical bodies that will boost in us new exercises for the soul. Let's continue and we are going to understand better. Thank you, friends. I think it's a beautiful discussion that we have and it's keeping us more open for more understanding. So now let's go back here to the slides because as the differentiate bacteria, the Leptotrichia, is moving and exchanging, it's rehearsing a step that comes next in the green algae. The green algae is the actual step in which sexual reproduction comes to place. Andre Luiz is going to tell us. Biologists in recent times often ask, without an answer, if the green algae, which have a particular structure, are descendants of the primitive cyanobacteria of simply weaving, in which the phycocyanin associated with chlorophyll is the blue pigment of its fundamental composition. Why is he saying this? Because we're just talking about the bacteria. And now he's saying to us something that science didn't know until then, didn't know until now. Then Andre Luiz reviews, says, it comes first. A transition, gradual transition from the bacteria to the algae. And he continues to tell us the gap or the missing link realized by Hugo de Vries while working on mutationism was completed by the activities of the servers of organogenesis on Earth, who submitted the family of Leptotrichia to the profound alterations in the fields of the spirit, transmuting into the more qualified beings, which reappeared metamorphosed in the referred algae, luxuriantly invading the waters and installing a new cycle of progress and renewal. So the picture on the background that you see is the picture of green algae. Okay? So what is André Luiz saying? Again, observe that he's saying that the spirits who have the role of being servers of the genesis, the organic genesis of the earth, they worked on this bacteria, mutating it, transforming it to later appear as the algae. Okay? So, does this mean that the spirits work with the physical and the spiritual as if they are um, as if they are um, in a lab? Yes. And Andre Luiz at the end of this chapter is going to use that expression, laboratory of the earth. So look at this. Servers of the genesis of organic genesis of the earth. He says scientists like Hugo de Vries didn't know. They were not sure. They were not sure. But Andre Luiz is revealing, no, the spirits who are taking care of the earth, they purposefully induced those mutations. And why are we shocked with it? We shouldn't. Why are we shocked? Because we saw in the we see in the labs nowadays scientists doing precisely that. And the purpose of scientists is not to create life on earth, but to study it. But we can induce mutations. That's second nature in a lab. We can do many of these operations nowadays, not with the same purpose because we are not at the level of the servers of the organizers of the earth, but it's possible. But these higher spirits are creating the conditions for the education of the intelligent principle, facilitating its development. I think this chapter, one of the main highlights is how often André Luiz tells us about these specialized high spirits who are working for the benefit of our development. It's unbelievable. Okay, so let's go back. And he says, now it's another subtopic, huh? Ay, ay, ay. Now he's talking about magnetic fluidic concentrations. That's what we are talking about. He's saying, again, observe, with the touch of divine workers, the elementary matter was in the beginning transubstantiated into astronomical mass of electrons and protons, which spun off the cradle of human life in full cosmic life. And yet, under their intelligence, under the supervision of the Christ of God, similar resources underlie the formation of atoms in elements. The elements are combined into chemical sets. The chemical sets open way to colloids. Colloids mix into substantial mixtures, thus providing to the intelligent principle the proper nest to development. Got it? Proper nest to development. Divine workers under the guidance of the Christ of God. For us, I know many people who read this book like people read the Bible, literally. They pay too much attention to the science and they forget the spiritual science. Because André Luiz is not writing this book to simply teach us about new things that material science is gonna realize sooner or later. But he's giving us the other side of the story, which is the genesis of it all. It's about the spirit. So he's repeating all the time, and it's not by chance. He's saying in this very paragraph here, he says to us, divine workers, they worked with that elementary matter to reach the level that we're talking about under the supervision of the Christ of God. And there are people who are the human level and they think that Jesus doesn't listen to them. But if the Christ of God on earth, Jesus, is focused supervising the development of elementary matter, of bacteria, algae, do you think Jesus does not know anything about us? Or does not have time for each one of us? This book is highly consoling. These insights are the most important ones. Visualize like in a lab the spirit's working to create what? The optimal internship opportunities for the spiritual principle. For the spiritual principle. And he says more, ages past, intended and the intelligent principle intended to grow for the glory of life. Pause. I'm not going to read the rest yet. You and I were created to grow for the glory of life. That's an affirmation. I was created to grow for the glory of life. I was created. Let's repeat it. If we don't feel the scriptures, there is no use. Knowing for knowing doesn't do anything. We need to feel it. So I was created to grow for the glory of life. You were created to grow for the glory of life. Somebody's depressed. Tell them this sentence and repeat a million times. Ask them to look at themselves in the mirror and say, I was created to grow for the glory of life. I was created to grow and glow for the glory of life. I was created to grow for the glory of life, says Andreas. And the architects of the divine wisdom, they turned up complex constitution, inserting the gifts of more complex reproduction in the chromosomes, or special magnetic fluidic concentrations. In the labs, we have pipettes. You know pipettes? You pipette into something like a tissue culture or a solution, concentrations of substances. Visualize. He says here, the divine wisdom, okay, the architects of divine wisdom, they insert magnetic fluidic concentrations. Think of the earth as a lab. Why? To help us progress. The proper nest to development, to create the proper conditions for our internship matter. The chromosomes. Now I'm going to go back to the slides. Okay. The chromosomes, he says, Remember the chromosomes? Look at the picture, please. Look at the picture. Right? The chromosomes? All right. Now he continues. Over time, these chromosomes, let me see if I skipped ones here. Sorry, I did. The chromosomes are structured in infinitesimal granules. You need the chromosomes for the exchange of the materials, the polarities, remember? So they are granules of physio-psychosomatic nature connected to the perispirit. They intersect with the physical body through the nucleus of the cell, where they are maintained, and they intersect with the spiritual body through the cytoplasm, where they are implanted. Do you remember when our dear Kardec, in the book Genesis, he mentions to us that we are connected molecule by molecule with the physical body when we incarnate? Hmm? So when we are in the flesh, okay, the chromosome intersects with the physical body in the nucleus, and then in the spiritual body in the cytoplasm. Molecule by molecule, perispirit and physical body. And André Luiz continues. Over time, the chromosomes differentiate according to the species, as much as vary the creations of printed thought, according to the typographic templates in the spheres of culture. The germinal elements are thoroughly analyzed and tested on the plants until they undergo essential transformations in the chemistry of green algae, whose complexion move in the direction of broader developments. What is he saying to us? That the, the experience of that spiritual principle keeps repeating itself successively, and through the experiences, remember, expanding and progressing, as Andrea Luiz says in another chapter. So that's why right now, almost at the end of this chapter, almost, not quite, or halfway through, he talks about filters of transformation. He says the intelligent principle is experimented in multiple ways in the laboratory of nature, while constituting little by little its physical and spiritual organization, and marking between heaven and earth the final destination. What is he saying to us? What is he saying to us? Filters of nature. He's saying what we already know. We as intelligent beings of the universe, at the level of intelligent principle, billions of years ago, we were doing internships in the laboratory of nature and constituting, creating our physical and spiritual body. Remember when André Luiz says about expansion, okay? Until we reach the final destination. Now he's going to repeat again, time and again, every paragraph he brings to us the confirmation that none of this happens by ourselves, alone, that we have constantly caregivers in the spiritual realm, babysitters in the spiritual realm, right? So he talks about it here as with the support of divine workers, the intelligent principle sets on itself the live seals of reproducibility that are defined and redefined throughout the millennia. So it took the divine workers millennia of patient work to make the intelligent principle acquire features that will establish reproduction, in sexual reproduction. He continues, they leave behind as filters of transformation not only the mineral and plant kingdoms, institutes of reception and expansion of the creative wave of life. I will sum it up to you, this part, okay? Because what he's gonna say here to us, instead of reading the whole paragraph, I have the paragraph in front of me here and say to you the following. With the support of the good spirits, we're going to keep doing these opportunities, and we're going to define and refine ourselves. This book stimulates us to open ourselves to learning. Many people become adults who have anxiety, depression, etc. because they don't want to learn anymore. They stopped, stagnated. They want that past or that future, not in the present. Learning. To learn, we need to be in the present. If we are here, but our minds is elsewhere, we're not going to learn. So we need to learn to be mindful in the present. Expanding. And elements of ascension, he says to us. He says, the germinal tissues suffer for thousands of years, continued tests to be able to assess their value and refine training. You see, he's saying that we are under training. So think about this in the next 24 hours. You are being trained. We have personal trainers, free personal trainers. And that's when he talks about the dinosaurs. He says monstrous forms appear and disappear. From annelids, snakes, to large animals, for centuries until species they could find accommodation in their own times. So the good spirits were working to adjust the best garments for our internships so we could do training sessions and expand our faculty. Right, Rudy? Among those that come to light, merging into the shadows. The chromosomes remain imperishable through the genetic centers of all beings, incarnated or not, shaping the precious foundation of future phylogenetic studies. Now, in the last part of this chapter, he's going to talk about heredity, genealogy, descendants, selection. Of course, because when we talk about reproduction, exchanges of sexual information, we're talking about transformations that go by fast. And another element that I want to answer to in Jailton's question, which was so important as well, he was asking why we need these polarities, is because to progress, to evolve, we need to exchange. If we keep only between ourselves, we don't evolve that much. We're keeping the same. So, to expand to the new features, we need to exchange with others. Law of society, law of progress. Right? Wow. Wow. So, let me ask you a question before we wrap up this chapter. Huh? I'll give you more information, but I want to ask you this. Since sex is a super taboo on our society, and I'm leaving this question to last, okay? Many people are conflicted about sex. They feel guilty, they feel ashamed, they feel dirty. But let me tell you this, when you read this chapter, you get to know that you didn't create sex. God did. The divine workers helped us use the polarities, those features, to enhance the possibilities of our progress. So what do we need to do? To stop feeling guilty about the polarities of the garments that we're using. Men and women, let's say, as sacred as it is, major lessons need to be learned. So, homework for all of us. Why did you reincarnate in this life in the body of a woman or in the body of a man? Why? If we don't know how to answer to this question, we're lacking major self-knowledge, because that is the first thing we need to teach ourselves to learn and ask our children. And nothing to do with sexual orientation. We're talking about features that are only possible to be boosted if we are using a particular garment of the clothing of a man or the clothing of a woman. What is that for? Why did you reincarnate in this life in the body of a man or of a woman? Huh? Okay, so Raza, if you have the answer, you can send it to me. But let's allow everybody to do their homework, okay? But you feel free to send it to me, okay? In the inbox, if you don't mind. I would love to know, but we need to ask. This is homework for us, because these good spirits, they're not playing games. This thing about, oh, I was born in the wrong body, I'm sorry, it doesn't exist. You are free to change it, free will, but there is no mistake. Even the science of Dr. Ian Stevenson, thousands of cases at the University of Virginia, shows to us that there is a reason why we reincarnate in the body of a man or of a woman. We need to identify it. Let's let's go back to the last part of the chapter, okay, friends? Let's go back. So, in these filters of transformation, I don't know what happened to. Oh, okay. It's fair to remember, says Andrea Luiz, that the gradual work of descendancy and selection that would find in Lamarck and Darwin, it's the most valuable thinkers, operated in two levels. The chrysalis of the realms of conscience, of the inferior kingdoms, immersed in the different vibrational field by the phenomenon of death, juxtaposed themselves to the reborn selves and continue to serve them. This is evidence of transmutation of the return to the physical realm by compulsory reincarnation under the guidance of sublime intelligences that sustain our pilgrimage. Circumstance that compels us to consider that the evolutionism of the species, as well as the formation of new species, adjusting to physiological functions, inheritance and expansion, are based in the mechanism and in the chemistry of the nucleus and the cytoplasm, where the physio-psychosomatic energies gathered. Whoa, what is he talking about here? He's saying chrysalis, he's saying the spiritual principle, doing these internships, okay? And he says compulsory reincarnation, meaning there is an order. Nobody reincarnates just because they want to, even animals, plants, etc. There is order in this universe. So, throughout the evolution of the species, these mutations are happening purposefully to allow us to expand. That's why he's saying inheritance and expansion, okay? Acquiring new features. And he's going to reinforce it in the last chapters, in the last paragraphs of the book. Two more slides. Genealogy of the spirit. We would simply add that the laws of animal reproduction, guided by the divine instructors, from the cocoon of the ferruginous leptotrixia or leptotrix, by shrinkage and expansion of energy in the occurrence of birth and death of form, summarized today in the organization of the human vehicle in the embryogenetic stage, the phylogenetic evolution of the entire animal kingdom, showing that beyond the science which studies the genesis of forms, there's also a genealogy of the spirit. What is he saying? I will put a pause before I go to the last slide. I know it's a lot of information, friends, but remember, we learn from effort and repetition. Let's make an effort, focus. André Luiz always repeat in the next chapter. He's saying something to us that science found out. When we are being gestated at human level, science already observed that through the phases of embryonic life, we mimic as if we are going through the phylogenesis of the species. So we're talking about different stages are being as if we are recapitulating everything. We're going to go back to that point later in the book, but for now, he's saying that happens in the physical body when we're being gestated at embryonic level because the mental body of the spirit commands it. So it's genealogy of the spirit. There are many people nowadays who are concerned about their ascendancy, and they are like, oh my gosh, I have genes from ancestors that were Native Americans, that were African Americans, that were Africans, that were this, that, and the other. But above it all is the spirit. This body here is molded by the perispirit, the spiritual body. And the spiritual body receives the mold from the mental body since day one. That's why it's simple. One cell. Unicellular organisms to pluricellular organisms. Okay. Let me go back to the last slide so we can wrap up the study of today. Again, he repeats, with celestial supervision, the intelligent principle spent, since viruses and bacteria, on the early hours of the protoplasm on Earth, about 15 millions of centuries, 1.5 billions of years, so that it could, as a thinking being, albeit in an embryonic stage of reason, release its first continuous thought emissions to the cosmic spaces. Observe, he's saying celestial supervision. In the last slide, he summarizes it all to us. Tomorrow, when we come back, we're going to study. He's going to repeat many of these things, so don't worry. If you're still puzzled about so many things, André Luiz, as a wonderful educator, is going to recap in the chapter 7, Evolution and Heredity. Okay? So, what are the main points for us today? One, it's not by chance that we are created in the polarity of the body of a man or a woman. We need to identify it. Two, you didn't create sex, so don't be guilty. And you shouldn't be guilty at all, but be responsible with the use of that creative force. Sex is creative force, says André Luiz. And we are using it for our development, not for our pleasure. It's for development. But God is so good that He makes us feel pleasure. But the goal It's not. Pleasure is not the end goal of it all. Huh? It's the reward. The good part of it all is the development. So we're still learning that we didn't create it, and the good spirits that are working side by side with God, with the Jesus Christ on earth, they are creating the special garments that we need for our training purposes in each and every internshiping matter, from the bacteria to the humans. Okay? So the homework is for us to fill the scripture, or this book has no purpose. André Luiz says, this book is to console the tortured hearts and the tortured minds. So, why did you reincarnate in the body of a woman or of a man? Why? To acquire what? Which features? Nothing to do with sexual orientation, huh? We're talking about emotional, spiritual qualities. What is that for? Okay, friends? Thank you, friends. Until tomorrow, God willing, we will be back with chapter 7 about heredity and evolution. If you're going to sleep, have a beautiful night, productive, useful. And if you're going to continue your day awake wherever you are in the world, remember, continue your day feeling the presence of these divine workers, these superior spirits, the architects that are taking care of our planet. Because if an amoeba, if a bacteria matters for them, imagine you. Until tomorrow, friends, keep nourishing your soul at Kardec Radio.